My name is Naomi Hale, 40 years old. I was seated behind a pillar at my brother's wedding, the kind of thick decorative column you only see in expensive country club venues that want to look like palaces. Everyone else had a clear view of the ceremony, the bride glowing under soft white lights, the groom standing tall at the altar, my parents smiling like they'd raised royalty. Me? I saw the back of a pillar and the backs of three strangers' heads. And somehow, that still wasn't the most humiliating part. The real sting came when a Marine Corps general, my former commanding officer, walked in late, spotted me sitting there alone, and froze like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. He looked at the card with my name, looked at the pillar blocking my view, looked at me. Then he leaned down, close enough that only I could hear, and said, in that low, unmistakable voice, "Just follow my lead and pretend you're my date." Later that night, when he stood to speak, every head in that room turned toward us. My father stopped smiling. My mother's face hardened into a mask. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before all of that, there was a much older story being played out long before this wedding ever happened. It was late June, Colorado summer in full bloom, the kind of warm, dry heat that made the air feel like sun-baked stone. The wedding venue sat on a hillside outside Denver, a luxury resort, chosen because my brother Mark had, in my mother's words, finally made it. Mark the golden child. Mark the man who could do no wrong. Mark the son who carried our family name forward. That's how my father introduced him to anyone who would listen. And me? I was simply Naomi, the daughter who'd run off to the Marines at 19 and spent nearly 2 decades moving from base to base, deployment to deployment, until my life no longer fit inside the picture-perfect family album my parents liked to show off at church potlucks. I arrived at the resort 2 hours before the ceremony. I always arrive early. It's a hard habit to break after years of being punished for cutting it close. I parked my rental car, checked my simple navy dress in the rearview mirror, and smoothed a crease that kept trying to come back. My hair was neat, makeup minimal. I looked fine, presentable, ordinary. I stared at my reflection a moment longer, trying to ignore the knot twisting in my stomach. Weddings are supposed to be warm, sentimental reunions. For me, they're usually just glossy reminders of distance, of choices my father never approved of the fact that while I was out serving my country, my family quietly learned how to live without me. As I walked toward the front lawn where the ceremony would take place, I passed clusters of well-dressed guests, the delicate clinking of champagne flutes, and the sharp, cheerful voice of a photographer directing bridesmaids in pale sage dresses to tilt their chins toward the mountains. Everything looked curated, intentional, like a magazine spread. I made the mistake of thinking maybe I could help. I approached the wedding planner, a young woman with a clipboard and a smile that looked one tug away from snapping. "Hi," I said. "I'm the groom's sister. Can I help with anything?" "Oh," she chirped, "everything's handled. You can just enjoy." Women like her never knew what to do with me. Broad shoulders, military posture, no interest in chatting about flower arrangements. I nodded, stepped aside, and let her glide past. I wandered toward the rows of white chairs, scanning for my name. The front rows had neat plaques. Parents, immediate family, VIP guests. I wasn't asking for front row. Logically, I figured I'd be somewhere near row 2 or 3. I was the groom's sister. Even if Mark and I weren't close, family was family. Or so I kept telling myself. I found my name eventually, Naomi Hale, printed in elegant script on a small, cream-colored card with a gold foil leaf. Row 12, far left corner, behind the pillar. The card had been placed deliberately, tucked half hidden by the marble column like an afterthought. Someone tried to dress in pretty stationery. I held it between my fingers for a long moment, that familiar, heavy feeling pooling in my chest. It wasn't the seat itself that hurt. It was everything it represented. Growing up, I'd always been the one pushed to the outer edges. Edges of conversations, edges of family photos, edges of expectations. My father believed sons built legacies and daughters supported them. He wasn't openly cruel about it. He just never questioned the belief. Mark was the shining future, the one who stayed home, joined the family business, dated girls my mother approved of, and eventually got engaged to the kind of woman who fit perfectly into their idea of success. I was not any of that. At 19, I joined the Marine Corps. My mother cried. My father went quiet for 3 days. Not with rage, but with a disappointment so heavy it felt like being erased. Mark asked why I didn't want a normal life. The Corps was the first place I felt seen. In uniform, merit mattered. Effort mattered. Whether you could lead when it counted mattered. Nobody cared who your father was at a backyard barbecue. Still, every time I came home on leave, I felt the gap widening. Dinner conversations revolved around Mark's promotions, his expanding real estate business, his engagement, his new truck. Whenever I mentioned deployments or training, the room would go quiet, like I'd spoken in a language no one wanted to understand. I remember one Thanksgiving more vividly than I'd like. I flew home from Okinawa with only 36 hours to spare. I brought my father a folded American flag that had flown during our unit's ceremony. I placed it on the kitchen counter, heart pounding like a kid handing in a final exam. "It flew over our base," I said. "Thought you might want it." He picked it up, turned it in his hands like a novelty. "You didn't have to bring me a pity flag, Naomi," he said. "I'd rather you just come home for good." He didn't mean it to wound, but it did, deeply. So when Mark announced he was getting married and mailed me a thick, embossed invitation, I felt conflicted. I wanted to be there. I also dreaded being there. I was his only sister, but when I offered to help, rehearsal, errands, anything, he just said, "Everything's covered. Just show up, okay? And don't worry about bringing a date. It's not a big deal." My role was simple: appear, but don't take up space. The night before the wedding, my parents hosted a small pre-wedding dinner. I walked in with a bottle of wine and a careful smile. Mom fussed over place settings. Dad talked shop with Mark and his soon-to-be brother-in-law. I hovered at the edge of the living room, listening to them laugh. At one point, the groom-to-be turned to my father and asked, "So what does your daughter do now?" Dad waved a hand vaguely. "She used to be in the Marines. Now she does something with security, I think. Consulting. Hard to keep track." I was standing 8 feet away. Later that night, Mark forwarded me the seating chart email in case I missed it. I opened the PDF in my guest room, zoomed in until the letters blurred. Row 12, behind the pillar. My name so small it might as well have been a footnote. The message was clear. This wedding has important people. You are not one of them. I slept badly. Well, slept is generous. I lay awake listening to the ceiling fan and the faint sound of my parents moving around the house, wondering at what point exactly I'd been written out of their story. The morning sun came through thin curtains, warm and gentle, utterly indifferent to the ache in my chest. I went downstairs to the smell of coffee and muffins. "Oh, Naomi," Mom said, like I'd surprised her. "Morning. There are eggs in the fridge if you want to make some. I didn't know when you'd be up." She had heard me pacing half the night. She looked right through that. Dad sat at the table reading the paper. He glanced up long enough to nod. Not warm, not cold, just acknowledgement. The kind you'd give a neighbor walking their dog past your driveway. They talked about timelines, guests, seating, floral deliveries. They did not talk about me. When I slipped on my shoes to leave early for the venue, Mom called after me. "Don't forget it's formal. Just look presentable for photos, dear." Years in the Marines had taught me to stand in storms. That sentence stung more than 100 screaming drill instructors. "I'll manage," I said. The drive to the venue wound through pine-lined roads and sweeping mountain views, so beautiful they felt almost aggressive, like the world was showing off on purpose. I'd driven roads like this before, heading out for deployments, coming home for funerals, leaving again for the next assignment. This time, I was just driving to sit behind a pillar at my brother's wedding. Sometimes life has a dark sense of humor. The resort was stunning: manicured lawns, stone archways, white flowers, arranged with surgical precision. I changed into my navy dress in a quiet hallway bathroom, smoothed my hair, took one last look in the mirror. For a brief second, I let myself imagine walking into the bridal suite and being pulled into laughter and champagne and shared excitement. It felt like trying on someone else's dress. It didn't fit. When I tapped on the bridal suite door, laughter and clinking glasses spilled out, bridesmaids in matching robes, the bride glowing under perfect light. Victoria, my soon-to-be sister-in-law, looked up in the mirror. "Oh, Naomi, you're early." "I thought I'd see if you needed help," I said. "The planner has it covered," she replied with a polite smile, "but thank you." I backed out with a nod. I didn't belong in that room. I never had. Outside, the ceremony crew adjusted chairs and tested microphones. I walked down the aisle alone. holding my little name card in my hand like a ticket to a show I wasn't entirely invited to. Row 12, far left, behind the pillar, still there, still deliberate. I stood there a long moment, feeling the warm breeze against my skin, the scent of roses and cut grass mixing with that old, familiar ache. I thought about leaving, driving back to Denver, eating waffles in some diner and pretending the wedding never happened. Instead, I sat, back straight, shoulders squared, just like the core had drilled into my bones. If I was going to be invisible, I was at least going to be invisible on my own terms. Guests began to arrive, family, friends, co-workers, distant relatives who hugged each other like they were the main characters. I stayed tucked behind the pillar, unseen, unheard, exactly where my family had placed me. Then a pair of polished shoes stopped near my feet. "Captain Hale, is that really you?" I turned, and the world snapped into a different focus when I saw him. Major General William Harlan, retired now, hair grayer, face more lined, but posture still straight as a rifle barrel. "General Harlan," I whispered. "Sir, what are you doing here?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes moved from my face to the pillar blocking my view, to the small card with my name half hidden behind stone. His jaw tightened, just a fraction. I'd seen that look before, right before he corrected something that was very, very wrong. "They put you here?" he asked quietly. I swallowed. "It's fine, I'm used to it." "No," he said. His voice was soft but edged with steel. "It's not fine." He sat down in the empty chair beside me, the one no one else had wanted, and leaned in. "Just follow my lead," he murmured, "and pretend you're my date." The general's words, "pretend you're my date," hung in the air like a challenge to the entire wedding. A challenge I wasn't remotely prepared for. I blinked at him, stunned, my heart hammering against my ribs. No one had ever claimed me so boldly in a room where I was always treated like an afterthought. Before I could respond, the wedding march began. Guests rose as one, a hush rippling through the crowd. The string quartet's music floated through the warm Colorado air, sweet and elegant. People leaned forward in anticipation. Phones lifted. Parents dabbed tears. The bride stepped into the aisle, glowing in soft ivory. And from where I sat, I saw none of it, just the general's profile and the corner edge of the pillar. He glanced sideways at me, incredulous. "You can't see a thing," he muttered. I forced a thin smile. "It's fine." His eyebrows lifted. "Captain, you survived firefights and mortar rounds. You don't have to survive this." But I did. I had survived versions of this my whole life. Moments where I was physically present, but emotionally erased, tucked into the shadows while the family spotlight shone on my brother. Sitting behind a pillar was nothing new. The ceremony continued, soft laughter and sniffles drifting around me like echoes from a world I wasn't part of. Somewhere beyond the stone column, Mark vowed forever to the woman standing before him. Family members beamed. Cameras flashed. I heard it all. I saw none of it. When applause finally erupted and the guests began to file toward the reception hall, I rose slowly, smoothing the skirt of my dress. The general stood as well, straightening his jacket with a quiet resolve I recognized instantly. He placed a hand gently under my elbow. "I'm not letting you disappear tonight." "General!" "Elizabeth," his voice softened. "Don't argue." He never used first names lightly. Before I could protest, he led me toward the ballroom, his presence commanding subtle attention from everyone around us. People glanced up, startled to see him. Recognition flickered. A retired Marine Corps general wasn't the kind of guest who blended into a crowd. Inside the reception hall, soft jazz drifted through the room. Servers glided between tables carrying trays of champagne. White tablecloths glimmered under the warm golden lights, and chandeliers sparkled overhead like frozen fireworks. The first thing I noticed was the seating chart, a massive, elegant display with hand-lettered cards arranged in neat rows. People crowded around it, smiling as they found their assigned places. "Let's see where they put us," the general said. He motioned me forward, but I already knew. I led him toward the far edge of the room, near the restrooms and side exit. The last row of tables, the ones reserved for forgotten relatives, old acquaintances, and guests who had to be invited purely for etiquette. There it was, my name card, tucked beside a votive candle at table 17, the absolute farthest table from the head table. The general scanned it, then checked the card next to mine. "Table 17, he muttered. "Same as me." He let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "Well, that explains a lot." Then he did something I absolutely did not expect. He reached down, plucked both name cards off the table, folded them crisply in half, and slipped them into his jacket pocket like classified documents. "General," I hissed, "we can't just—" "Yes," he said calmly, "we can." He turned and began walking toward the front of the ballroom. Not briskly, not defiantly, just purposefully, like a man moving toward an outcome already decided. I followed, my pulse thudding like a drum. People parted subtly, conversations softening as he passed. Even out of uniform, he carried an authority that lingered long after retirement. He stopped at table 3 rows from the head table, in the territory of family, politicians, and high-profile guests, the kind of table where presence meant significance. A woman seated there looked up sharply. "General Harlan, hello, but these seats are—" "Reserved," he said, smiling warmly, "only until we sit." He pulled out a chair for me, gesture smooth and old-fashioned. My stomach flipped. I felt heat rising to my face, aware of dozens of eyes shifting toward us. "General," I whispered urgently as I sat, "this is too much. My family—" "Needs to learn something," he said quietly, settling into the chair beside me. "And sometimes lessons require an audience." Before I could respond, a well-dressed man from the next table leaned over, hand extended. "General Harlan, sir. What an honor. You're here for the Carter wedding?" The general shook his hand with practiced ease. "Yes, I'm here with my date, Naomi." Heat flooded my cheeks. The man blinked in surprise, then smiled at me deferentially. "A pleasure to meet you." I murmured something polite, but my mind was racing. Every introduction was a small earthquake in the room's social order. Another guest approached. "General, we'd love to have you speak with our Veterans Foundation." He didn't miss a beat. "I'd be glad to," he said, "but allow me to introduce Captain Naomi Hale first, one of my finest officers during deployment." The words hit me harder than I expected. Captain Naomi Hale, not Mark's sister, not the girl who moved away, not an afterthought. Captain, Marine, significant. Something inside me, something quiet and worn, shifted. Out of the corner of my eye, at the head table, my father was staring. His expression had frozen mid-smile. My mother looked like she'd just heard a language she didn't know existed. Dinner service began. Salads, rolls, soft chatter. More than once, guests made their way toward our table to greet the general, and every single time, he made sure to introduce me first. Not as family backup, not as an accessory, but as an equal. Yet with each introduction, with each nod of respect from strangers, the tension at the head table tightened like pulled wire. And then things shifted again. The maid of honor finished her speech to warm applause. The best man went next. Funny, sentimental, predictable. Then the band began a soft interlude. The general leaned slightly toward me. "When it's time, I'm going to say something." My heartbeat spiked. "General, please don't. This is Mark's wedding. I don't want drama." He gave me that look, the one he used to give when a young Marine doubted an order essential for survival. "Families should know when they've misjudged someone," he said softly, "especially someone who served." I swallowed hard. "What are you planning?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because 3 minutes later, I saw him place his napkin neatly on the table, the same quiet gesture he made before giving critical briefings overseas. Something inside me whispered, "Brace yourself." The band faded out, conversation softened, and the general stood, effortlessly, calmly, like he'd been standing to command rooms his entire life. A server approached quickly. "General, sir, would you like the microphone?" He shook his head, eyes glinting. "That won't be necessary." The room fell silent. Every head turned. Even the bride paused mid-sip. He looked out over the room, then down at me, and began. General Harlan didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence alone pulled the entire room taut with attention, the way a sudden shift in the wind warns soldiers that something is about to happen. Conversations died mid-sentence. The band members froze with instruments half-lowered. My father straightened in his seat. My mother's hand hovered mid-air, caught between a champagne flute and disbelief. "Good evening," the general began, tone steady, warm, but threaded with command. "I apologize for speaking out of turn. I know weddings have schedules and speeches assigned to specific people." A ripple of polite laughter. People adored him already. He continued, posture straight, every inch the leader he had always been. "Some of you know me. Some of you don't. My name is William Harlan. I served in the United States Marine Corps for 35 years. There was immediate applause, loud, enthusiastic. A few guests even rose to their feet. The general nodded humbly, but his eyes were scanning the room, not with pride, but with purpose. And tonight, he said, I'd like to acknowledge someone else who served. My stomach dropped. Heat rushed to my face. My fingers curled hard around the stem of my water glass. She was one of the finest officers under my command, he continued, a Marine whose strength, intelligence, and courage made a difference in places most people can't even imagine. His gaze found mine. Captain Naomi Hale. The silence that followed was suffocating, electrifying, like inhaling lightning. I felt every head turn, felt the weight of dozens of stares landing on me at once, felt the world tilt in slow motion. My father's smile vanished so abruptly it was almost visible, like a mask slipping off. My mother's lips parted, her eyes wide. Mark blinked rapidly at the head table, trying to compute what he was hearing. The general wasn't finished. She led Marines under fire, he said, voice deepening. She made decisions that saved lives. She carried responsibilities that would break most people. I swallowed hard. A familiar sting burned behind my eyes. This woman, he continued, has served her country with distinction, courage, and honor. He paused, long enough for the words to sink in, long enough for my family to feel each syllable. And yet tonight I discovered she was seated. He gestured casually toward the back rows, behind a pillar. A collective gasp. People whispered, "What? Is that true? That's Mark's sister?" My skin felt hot and cold at the same time. She couldn't see her own brother's ceremony, he said plainly, not because the venue ran out of seats, not because of space, but because someone decided she didn't belong in the front. Outrage scattered across the crowd in quiet murmurs. My father's jaw tightened. My mother's eyes darted toward the planner, then toward me, as if trying to find someone else to blame. General Harlan's voice dropped into a lower, deeply controlled register. I've spent my life defending Marines, he said, and I have never tolerated disrespect toward them, especially when it comes from their own family. That line cracked something inside me. A knot I'd carried for decades shifted, loosened, broke open. He placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, steady, grounding, something between a shield and an embrace. I won't tolerate it here, he said. A tear slid down my cheek before I could stop it. So tonight, he concluded softly, let me be absolutely clear. He raised his glass. To Captain Naomi Hale. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the entire room erupted. Applause thundered. Chairs scraped back. People stood, rows and rows of them, lifting their glasses. The sound swelled, filling every corner of the ballroom. I sat frozen, overwhelmed by a tidal wave of emotion I didn't know how to contain. My hands shook, my breath caught in my throat. I felt seen, terrifyingly, brilliantly seen, for the first time in years. General Harlan leaned down, voice soft enough that only I could hear. They needed to hear it, he murmured, and you needed them to hear it. I swallowed. Sir, I don't know what to say. Then don't say anything, he whispered. Just hold your head high. And strangely and possibly, I did. When the applause faded, the crowd returned to their seats, except for the people who immediately approached our table. Thank you for your service. It's an honor to meet you. You must be so proud. Strangers shook my hand. The photographer snapped pictures of me, not around me. Servers lingered to thank me quietly. It was surreal. But the real shift came from one direction only, across the ballroom, at the head table. My father was staring at me, not with anger, not with confusion, but with something far more complicated, something like recognition, something like guilt, something like pride he didn't know how to handle. The meal resumed, but the equilibrium in the room had shattered. The social hierarchy had been rearranged in a single speech. I could feel the tremor beneath everything. I just didn't know how close I was to the aftershock. Around dessert time, the real confrontation began. I didn't see my father approach. I felt him. A shift in the air, the tightening in my spine. Years of instinct honed by deployment and childhood both. The general noticed him too. He stood respectfully, nodded once, and stepped just far enough away to give us privacy, but stayed close enough to intervene if needed. That alone nearly undid me. Dad stopped at my chair, hands pressed against his pockets, jaw clenched. Naomi, he said. My breath caught. He'd said my name, not your sister, not she. My name. Dad, I answered quietly. May I sit? He had never asked, never needed to, but now he waited. I nodded. He pulled out the chair beside me, not across, not with a barrier of distance, but beside me, and sat with a heaviness that looked like it came from somewhere deeper than age. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he exhaled. I didn't know you served under him. I didn't think you'd care, I said before I could stop myself. He flinched. My father flinched. The man who never showed emotion, who spoke in monotone at funerals and triumph at graduations, flinched. I cared, he said quietly. I just didn't know how to show it. A familiar bitterness rose in my chest. Years of silence, overlooked achievements, dismissed service. But beneath it was something I wasn't expecting, a glimmer of truth. He wasn't making excuses. He was confessing. When you joined the Marines, he said, voice trembling, I didn't know how to support you. I didn't understand your world. I didn't fit in it, and instead of learning, he swallowed. I pulled away. My throat tightened. I never wanted to make you feel invisible, he whispered, but I see now that's exactly what I did. For a moment, the entire ballroom fell away. It was just me and my father, just a wound and the man who made it, just a lifetime of silence finally cracking open. Dad, I whispered, I always wanted your approval. I just stopped expecting it. He closed his eyes, pained. I know. He looked up, eyes glassy, but resolute. And I want to fix that, he said, if you'll let me. Tears blurred my vision. I blinked them back. I want that too, I said. He nodded, shoulders loosening for the first time all night. Then a young coordinator rushed up, apologetic. Mr. Carter, they're ready for the parent dance. He stood slowly, gave me a small, hesitant smile. We'll talk more after. I'd like that, I said. As he walked toward the dance floor, he looked back once, just once. And in that moment, I wasn't the forgotten daughter. I was his daughter. He just took 40 years to realize it. The night moved on. Music, dancing, soft laughter, but everything felt different. Lighter, unsteady, full of possibility and fear. And yet I knew the wedding wasn't the end of this story. It was only the beginning of the reckoning. The applause from the evening's final toast had barely faded when the ballroom began its slow unraveling. The soft clatter of plates, the dimming of chandeliers, the scraping of chairs as guests prepared to leave. Weddings always ended this way, with a kind of sweet exhaustion settling over everything, like the party itself was finally ready to exhale. But that night, something in me refused to settle. Something had shifted, quietly, violently, irreversibly. I stepped outside through the French doors onto the terrace. The air was cooler now, carrying the scent of pine and distant lake water. String lights glowed overhead like tiny suspended stars, reflecting off the still surface of the resort pond. For the first time all day, I allowed myself to breathe without analyzing or correcting my posture. Mind if I join you? The general's voice cut through the quiet like a familiar anchor. He stepped beside me, hands folded behind his back, still standing with the kind of posture they teach you in training and carve into your bones for life. You holding up, Captain? He asked. I let out a slow breath. I don't know yet. He nodded, as if that was the most honest answer a person could give. Biggest battles are fought without rifles, he said softly. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. A laugh, small, exhausted, escaped me. You always did talk like a recruitment poster. And you always rolled your eyes at me for it, he countered. Some things don't change. I looked at him, studying the lines on his face, the years of leadership etched into his expression. Out of all the people in the world who might have walked into that ceremony, it had to be him, the one person who knew me from the inside out, across deployments, through loss, on long nights when command meant balancing strategy with compassion. He was the one person who had never treated me like an afterthought. I meant what I said, I whispered. Thank you for everything. I felt seen tonight, really seen. His eyes softened. Naomi, I didn't do anything tonight that wasn't already true. You earned every word. I swallowed the knot forming in my throat. Still, thank you. He gave a small, approving nod. You don't owe me gratitude, but you do owe yourself recognition, before anyone else does. We stood together in the soft mountain air for another quiet minute, watching reflections ripple across the water. Then voices from inside drifted toward us, and I recognized the cadence immediately. My father. He stepped out onto the terrace moments later, spotting us with a slight start. His jacket was unbuttoned, his tie loosened, and the stiffness he normally wore like armor had eased into something more human. We're heading out, Dad said, his voice unusually gentle. I wanted to see you before we left. My heart kicked nervously. The general stepped back a respectful distance, giving us space, but still within reach, the way he always had been in the field. Dad looked at me for a long moment. a searching look that made me uneasy and hopeful in equal measure. "I meant what I said earlier," he murmured. "I'm proud of you, more than I ever let on." "Dad, my voice cracked. "I know." He swallowed hard, emotion tightening his features. "I want to fix things, if you'll let me. Not just tonight, going forward." "I want that too," I said, the words trembling with truth. He hesitated, then reached for me, tentative at first, then firmer, pulling me into a hug that felt decades overdue. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't movie-worthy, but it was real. When he stepped back, there was something different in his eyes, a humility I'd never seen. "Come by next week," he said. "Dinner, just us. I'd like that." My chest tightened. "I'd like that too." He nodded once, squeezed my shoulder, and walked toward the exit where my mother and Mark were waiting. Mom gave me a small nod from across the terrace, a tiny gesture, but noticeable. Mark lifted a hand, half wave, half apology. It was imperfect, but I suspected this night had cracked their certainty in ways they weren't prepared to admit yet. And then they were gone. The terrace was quiet again. The general approached and stood beside me. "You okay?" I exhaled softly. "Better than I was this morning." "That's enough for today," he said. "Tomorrow be better. Next week, better than that." I smiled. "Still giving orders?" He shrugged. "Only the good ones." We walked back into the now empty ballroom. Candles flickered low, centerpieces wilted slightly, chairs scattered like remnants of a battle none of the guests fully understood. I gathered my small clutch purse, nodded to the exhausted wedding staff, and made my way to my car. The drive back to the hotel was quiet. Mountains outlined against a dark sky, headlights carving a path through the winding road. I fell asleep that night like someone who'd survived something more emotional than physical, but just as draining. The next weeks were strange, gentle, awkward, careful. Dad and I met for dinner, then again the week after. At first, the conversations were clumsy. He asked about my deployments, my injuries, the people I served with. I told him only as much as I could without betraying classified details or reopening wounds. But he listened, really listened, like he was memorizing missing chapters of my life. It was the most healing thing I'd felt in years. Mom thawed slowly. She wasn't suddenly warm or affectionate, but she stopped dismissing my career. She asked small questions, tiny steps toward understanding. Sometimes that's all you get, and sometimes that's enough. Mark apologized in his own roundabout way. He admitted that he'd told the planner I probably didn't want to be in the front. A small lie masking a larger truth. I told him I didn't believe him, but I accepted his attempt. Forgiveness isn't always clean. Months passed. My brother had a baby girl, then a boy. I became Aunt Naomi, the one who built things, played catch, snuck them cookies, let them climb on my back like I was a small mountain. And I realized something. I would never sit behind a pillar in their lives. The general and I kept in touch. Coffee once a month, sometimes stories, sometimes silence. He never overstepped, never implied anything romantic, never acted like I needed a rescuer. He was simply there, a mentor, a friend, a man who reminded me who I was when my family forgot. One day over coffee, I thanked him again. He lifted a brow. "Elizabeth, sorry, Naomi. How many times are you going to thank me?" "Until it stops feeling like a miracle." He chuckled. "It wasn't a miracle. It was the truth. I just said it out loud." Years moved forward. The wedding became a family legend whispered at holidays. Some said the general embarrassed everyone. Others said he saved the night. Only he and I knew the truth. He didn't save the night. He saved something in me. And from that, everything else grew. If you're listening to this, maybe you've been overlooked. Maybe you've been pushed into the corners of rooms where you deserve to stand proudly. Maybe your family saw you through a narrow lens that never reflected your worth. Here's what I learned. Sometimes the world won't acknowledge your value until someone forces them to look. Sometimes that someone is you. And sometimes, if you're incredibly lucky, it's someone who saw your strength long before you did. Hold your head high. Forgive when you can. Stand firm when you must. And never, ever let a pillar block your view of your own worth.